right, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to ACAP Hall County for July. Just a couple housekeeping things. There is coffee over here if you guys want it. If you go out the door to the left, there are 2 bathrooms immediately on your left. And then if you came through this door, that's the exit. So we are going to hear today about recognizing Alzheimer's and other dementias. So we're going to have Veronica Reidling present to us. She is our dementia care specialist here at Legacy Link. She has been with us for quite a few years. She formerly served as our kinship care coordinator. So she was linking older adults who were caring for children to resources and then providing support groups for them. So in her new role as a dementia care specialist, she'll be providing outreach and education, both in-house and within the community, around types of dementias, tips for caregivers, how to kind of combat burden, and other general information. She has completed a bunch of dementia-related trainings that include dealing with dementia, which she'll talk a little bit about today. That's through the Rosalind Carter Institute. She has also completed the Eden Alternative Training, and she holds a Dementia Practitioner Certificate. That's just to name a few of the trainings she's gone through. So please help me welcome Veronica.
Morning. So as Elaine said, thank you for the warm welcome. I'm Veronica Reidling, and we're going to jump right in. So today we're going to talk about recognizing Alzheimer's and other dementias. As you know, I work for Legacy Link. We're the area agency on aging, and we serve 13 counties in Northeast Georgia. If you're not familiar with our programs, there's going to be a link at the end that you can go to our website. Our mission is to support and advocate for older adults and people with disabilities, and to be their link to a better life. So when we were talking about dementia, I thought that maybe it would be a good idea to talk about what is dementia, or rather than what dementia is not. Dementia is not a normal part of aging, and it's not a specific disease. Dementia involves at least 2 functions that are impaired enough to affect the daily life. As I said before, dementia is not a specific diagnosis, but rather an umbrella term. And we know about over 100 conditions that can cause symptoms of dementia, but about 90% of people who have a dementia diagnosis will fall into these top 4, which are Alzheimer's, vascular, Lewy body, which sometimes will be called dementia with Lewy bodies, and frontal temporal. We're also going to touch a little bit about what pseudodementia is. So Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. So we're going to start with that one. It is a progressive condition, and it develops symptoms over many years. Some researchers have found that there may be markers present up to 20 years before an official diagnosis. So researchers say that it's an accumulation of the protein beta amyloid outside of the neurons and twisted strands of the protein tau inside the neurons, and those are the hallmarks. The exact cause is unknown, though. As with many of the other dementias, the exact cause sometimes cannot be pinpointed. Let's go back to that one for a second. On the left side of the screen is an illustration of what a normal brain would look like. On the right side of the screen is a brain that is in a more advanced state of Alzheimer's. The shrinkage of the cerebral cortex, the enlarged ventricles, and the extreme shrinking of the hippocampus is what happens in later stages. Sometimes when people go for their first MRI or CT scan, it's not really noticeable, but after they go several times over years, there's a noticeable difference in the structures of their brains. So I have a 1-minute video for you. So many of my statistics will be coming straight from the Alzheimer's Association. I don't know if you've noticed in that video, they estimated that there are nearly 7 million people. Over on the table, there are these handy fold-out maps. Please feel free to take extra if you would like. The only thing that has changed from when these were printed is it went from 5 million to 7 million. And these stats in this are only about 4 years old. So there's an exponential rise every year of people getting not only an Alzheimer's diagnosis, but a dementia diagnosis. Also in the video, it talked about 360 billion is the cost for Alzheimer's and other dementias. And I don't believe that that includes the 11 million caregivers that are unpaid. By 2050, they're estimating it costing $1 trillion. So there's a lot of push to learn about not only early diagnosis, but the progression of the disease and how we can slow it down or perhaps reverse it. So let's jump right into Alzheimer's. Around 60 to 80% of people who have a dementia diagnosis will have an Alzheimer's diagnosis. Sometimes in the early stages, though, recognizing Alzheimer's and other dementias can be kind of difficult because of what is considered normal aging. On the left, you'll see that here's some of the symptoms of normal aging. Sometimes forgetting a name or a date or that you had an appointment. For me, it's usually about an hour after I was supposed to be there. Or occasionally paying a bill late or making a mathematical mistake. I actually made a big mathematical mistake last week. I went into an online account to make a payment on a small home improvement loan that I have. And I was just going to make an extra payment just to get myself ahead a little. Rather than putting $127, I put $1,127. And despite the fact that I called the loan company immediately, they could not help me, and I ended up having to do a stop payment through my bank, which cost $35. So the upside is the bank is going to stop the payment. The downside is the loan company was not willing to help me. Luckily, this is a rare mistake for me, but if I was making this mistake over and over again, if you look on the other side, trouble with working with numbers and paying bills is an early sign of Alzheimer's. When it happens once, it's not that big a deal. But when it happens every month, it becomes a big issue. Sometimes finding the right word also comes into play. I find myself all the time. My husband will go to the shed and he'll say, "Hey, do you need anything? Do you want me to bring anything back?" And I'll say, "Oh yeah, I need, that thing that has a head on it and I want to hang something. It's the hammer." Yes, the hammer. Thank you, honey. I appreciate that. That's part of normal aging. It's also part of being stressed, sometimes being tired. There's many different reasons why you could have symptoms that go on both sides. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the pseudodementia slide. With Alzheimer's, there's also a change in personality and a withdrawal from work or social activities. However, some of these can also be attributed to vision or hearing loss. Sometimes individuals that have hearing loss become more isolated because it's so awkward to go and have social groups, especially when there's extra noise. If you're going to a party, it's hard to distinguish things. Someone might start feeling a little insecure, left out, and then they start withdrawing. Is it a sign of Alzheimer's? It could be, but it also could be a sign that they need to have their hearing checked. Jumping into vascular, around 5 to 10% of people who have a vascular diagnosis have only a vascular diagnosis. However, we're learning more and more about how these diagnoses overlap. So that 5 to 10% may have multiple diagnoses, may have multiple conditions that add to this. Some people have asked, are you talking about the hardening of the arteries? Well, yes, kind of. That is actually a real thing, and it can lead to vascular dementia. When the blood vessels constrict or harden in the brain or in the neck, it can lead to a decrease of brain or blood to the brain, a decrease in oxygen. There's a snowball effect from that. So people that have vascular, it's sometimes also difficult to recognize at first. I went through this with my own mother, and I had no idea. Even though in my early 20s, I was a home health care aide, and I worked directly with people who were living in their family home. Many of them had Alzheimer's diagnoses. But 20 or 30 years ago, we didn't have the information that we have today. And as a direct support person at the time, I was not given any information at all. So I just did the best I could. We all did at the time. And there's a lot of things that we did 20, 30, 40 years ago that would be unthinkable to do now. So some of the first symptoms of vascular is slowed thoughts or inability or impaired ability to make good decisions, difficulty with planning, changes in mood or behavior, trouble understanding, and problems with concentration. For my mom, it was a lot of losing information that she had just received. When she lived on her own, I was receiving calls from the community and places that she would go to on a regular basis, and people started saying, hey, you know what, there's something different about your mom. You need to start paying attention to this. A neighbor called and was concerned about her driving. Other people in the community recognized it before I did. But at the same time, I had a weird relationship with my mom. So there was a lot of that mother-daughter angst between us anyways, and being in my early 30s, also caring for 3 small children, it was a lot. So when I found her at home nearly unresponsive because she had forgotten to take her diabetes medication, and she was very confused, very out of it, that's when was the wake-up call that she needed some help. She came to live with me, and it progressed, although I still didn't recognize it until it was way past the stage where we could really do anything about it. So we're going to jump into frontotemporal. One of my paragraphs is messed up over there, so just ignore most of the text on the left. Frontotemporal happens when there's an atrophy to the nerves in the frontal lobes or the temporal lobes of the brain. About 60% of people with frontotemporal or FTD are between 45 and 60 years old. So the idea that dementia only happens when you're old or older people is not true on all of the dementias. Some studies have showed that symptoms can appear as young as 21, although that's kind of rare. It happens. And when symptoms start to appear in a younger individual, it's rarely considered a red flag for dementia. Researchers are coming along, the communities are becoming more aware, people are talking about it more, and these are things that we need to have open conversations about. There's a lot of stigma around dementia, and there's a lot of stigma around mental health issues, and these are things that we haven't talked about openly for a long time, or ever. But it's now becoming a little more comfortable to talk about these things openly, and the more we try to break the stigma around it, the less people become isolated. The less afraid people will be when they say to themselves, I think I have an issue. Or a family member is afraid to approach that person because they don't know what to say and they don't know what they're looking at. So being more open, I think, will help the conversations move forward and more people will recognize the signs. There's 2 different forms of frontotemporal. There's the straight frontotemporal, which is also known as Pick's disease, or it's also called frontal lobe dementia. And there's the behavioral variant. the behavioral variant changes a person's personality so fast. I've talked to several family members and people with FTD themselves, and because they started having symptoms when they were younger, and it so happens that one in particular had the behavioral variant. So the story went, he started out as a really nice guy, and we'll call him Ted. I don't have any clients named Ted. Ted's going to be a combination of several people that I've talked to with this. But Ted started out as a really nice guy, and then he just started becoming more aggressive. He started saying inappropriate things. Ted had a great sense of humor, and now his humor is a little offensive. Oftentimes people with frontotemporal, their spouse will say, "We tried everything. I don't know what's wrong. We even did marriage counseling." But Ted was not the person that she married. Mary is not the person that Ted married. Whatever situation that person finds themselves in, their personality is changing. Ted's wife would tell the neighborhood, "Hey, I don't know what's going on." I do know some people who live in a small retirement county or community in one of the counties that I serve, and they are very well versed in frontotemporal now. They are becoming very comfortable with talking to their neighbors about it and letting their community know, "Hey, you know what? If he starts saying inappropriate things, just walk away. There's nothing that he can do to control it, and there's nothing I can do to control it. So just walk away." Some of the symptoms of frontotemporal, and it comes on a lot faster than some of the other dementias. If you start on the left at number 1, emotional blunting or apathy. Blunting is where you have the inability to experience emotions fully, whether they are positive or negative, which leaves you looking and feeling very apathetic. They may start having repetitive or compulsive behaviors. There's changes in personality, and loss of empathy or social skills, and those three go together. The emotional blunting, the apathy, the changes in behavior, the loss of social skills and empathy for others. Some people say, he was a really religious guy all his life, and all of a sudden now he's into porn. And where did that come from? And it's compulsive. Just things just pop up out of the blue, and they're like, that's not the neighbor I've lived next to 20 years, or that's not my husband, so it comes on pretty quick, and it's shocking. Sometimes it can have language difficulties and impaired executive function, especially in the later stages. And executive function is where you are able to regulate everything, regulate your own emotions, set your own schedules, make sure that you're doing the things that you need to do to take care of your body and your mind and your family. Those executive functions start to slip away. Now, some of you may be familiar with Wendy Williams. She recently had a diagnosis of frontotemporal. However, hers started with aphasia, which is sometimes a difficulty in speaking, understanding speech, or understanding written. So reading and comprehension is difficult. She had quite a story though, and she had multiple diagnoses before the aphasia set in. And then the frontotemporal diagnosis came just about a year ago. Who else? Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis also has the same diagnosis, and I believe that his also started with progressive aphasia. Lewy body, or dementia with Lewy bodies, sometimes shortened to DLB. This is a different one. This is where abnormal clumps of protein of alpha-synuclein develop in the neurons in the brain. About 5% of older individuals with dementia show evidence of Lewy body dementia alone. The other 95% cross over with another form of dementia, which is also called mixed pathologies. It's similar to Parkinson's, but it's not the same. There's several different diagnoses that cross over with this, including Parkinson's. Some of the early stages of Lewy body dementia are the delusions, which can be extremely realistic. Full-blown hallucinations that seem very realistic. Restlessness, sleep disorders, movement difficulties, which sometimes look like Parkinson's, and they are very closely related. In the middle stages, their motor impairment becomes increased. People have difficulty moving up and down stairs. There's balance issues. The more stiff that their body becomes, the more difficult it is for them to control their body movements. They have decreased attention. They can feel very paranoid, and they can be significantly confused. In the later stages, the extreme rigidity of their muscles becomes quite an issue, and they have speech difficulties. They don't understand speech. Sometimes they can't speak, and they can become very sensitive to the touch. These are just a few of the symptoms, and it's unlike Alzheimer's or vascular that take time to accumulate. Sometimes these come on fairly suddenly. Sometimes it's crossing over with ALS or Lou Gehrig's. The main thing that I have learned about this diagnosis is that only 5% have this diagnosis alone. So if physicians are starting to look at this diagnosis, there's probably going to be some other things that pop up along with it. So, talking about pseudodementia, have y'all heard about pseudodementia? No? So, pseudodementia it can cause symptoms of dementia. It can make you feel like you should have concern. When you start seeing the symptoms that we talked about earlier in the Alzheimer's slide, when you start seeing them over and over again in a very short period of time, you may find yourself wondering, is there something wrong with my brain? Do I have some type of vascular? Is there something going on that's causing this? Well, yeah, there is. There probably is. But some of the things that can accumulate in your life, like lack of sleep, stress, overthinking, multitasking, if you feel a little depressed, all of these things feed into one another and can cause it to be worse and worse. If you go online, there's stress scales, and it will give you a score for what kind of stressful event you're going through. If you've lost your job or you changed your job, you'll get a certain number of points. If you have lost a close family member, if you've moved or if you've lost your home, there's all these different reasons why that you could be stressed. And if you combine a lot of those together, along with running a household, trying to multitask your job and your home, and you might be overthinking at night and you're losing sleep. So it kind of compiles it all together. On the right, there's some other dementia mimics, medication side effects. It's pretty rare these days that we're not on one or more prescription medication. It's just an American thing. And it's hard especially if you're on multiple medications, it's difficult to keep up with all the side effects. And maybe that new medication is making a side effect from another medication a little worse. And those side effects might be disturbing your sleep. It might be making you feel a little depressed. A lot of medications have those as side effect warnings. Excessive alcohol consumption can also do this, especially if you drink a lot over time.
Because of the effects of the sleep distress going on, forget things throughout the day or reading up routines, things like
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and you may find yourself searching for words more, especially after a lot of lack of sleep. I have experienced this several times in my life, and especially after learning more about these, I've looked at myself so many times. I've started looking at my family members, like, you're acting a little weird today. So my kids make fun of that because they know that I'm just, I'm really involved and I really read a lot and I'm doing a lot of studying on the different dementias and how they affect us. So it's hard not to look at yourself as you start learning of these things, as you start digging deeper, but keep in mind that there are other reasons that you could be having symptoms of dementia. Especially with excessive alcohol consumption, that's self-medicating. Let's say you're very stressed because you've had some big life events. The stress got you overthinking, you're not sleeping, you're self-medicating, and then the self-medicating makes your sleep disturbances worse, it makes you more stressed. It can be a vicious cycle. However, the good news is this type of situation is fixable. Unlike a true dementia, it doesn't cause long-term damage to the brain. If a person ignored this though, and it kept going and going and going and going, especially with the alcohol consumption, other things can pop up. You can start having liver problems. You can long term. So, but like I said, it doesn't cause long term problems with the brain. It's very reversible. It can be treatable. Again, talking about this with your close friends and family members, making it okay to talk about this, addressing some of the stigmas around it can be very helpful. I recently went into a retirement community, very nice little community, very tight-knit, a lot of great little resources and activities. And I had at least 5 people come up with their spouse and tell me about their dementia diagnosis and that they didn't know anyone else. And what floored me at that event was that this is a very small, tight-knit community. And when I asked them, have you told your neighbors, have you talked to anyone in this community about it? They said no. They were afraid. They were afraid that once they let people know that they were having these types of symptoms or issues, they were afraid of being stigmatized. They were afraid that people would treat them differently. Also, delirium. Are you all familiar with delirium? Okay, so delirium can also be misdiagnosed as dementia, or it can appear to be dementia, especially sometimes it happens after like a surgery, and you're coming back around after being heavily sedated, and the delirium can last for a while, but it looks pretty scary to your close friends and family members. Also, it typically goes away. So, talking about how to reduce your risk, even though we don't know exactly what causes certain types of dementias, a healthy lifestyle always is a good idea. And researchers have found that those who have a lower risk of dementia or communities that have lower diagnosis of dementia, the people who live there have things in common. They eat a healthy lifestyle. If you look online, there's places in the world called blue zones, and they have a higher rate of older individuals living healthy lifestyles into their 90s and sometimes into their hundreds. So if you look at those communities, they have a lot of different things in common. There's an island in Japan, there's one in Greece, there's a community in California, just to name a few of the blue zones. They have really, really great things in common with each other. They're highly social communities. As people age, they still have a place. If you look at, I believe it might be Okinawa, seniors and older people regularly interact with children on a daily basis. There's always a place, there's always something for them to do. They are never tucked away like, oh, you need to go sit down. This is, they stay extremely active. They also have a very great diet. Especially like in the Greek Isles, they have the Mediterranean diet is brought up a lot. Emory University recommends the Mediterranean diet. But there's also a big social component to it. When you become isolated, you're not using your brain as much. You're not using your immune system as much. Some researchers say that the more you're around other people, the more you pick up little bugs, you get little sickness, you're increasing your immune system to it. So when they are very socially active, when they're doing things in the community that they enjoy, they're using both their brain to do things. If you're going out playing games, if you have exercise routines, if you just get together with a group of people and go for a walk once a week in the park, there's more than just exercise that is involved there. You have conversation, and people are involved in your life, you're involved in theirs, and it makes a huge difference. People who become isolated, going back to the pseudo-dementia slide, you start feeling depressed. You might start losing sleep. You might start using alcohol or other drugs to self-medicate because you feel lonely. Also avoiding knocks on the head. Years and years ago, there was a place in Gainesville called the Guest House. And I met several people through that organization who had a trauma to the brain. So protecting your head is vitally important, especially if you're doing a risky activity, wearing a helmet when you're riding a bicycle, being careful when you're going up and down stairs, icy sidewalks in the winter. And as we age, we kind of protect ourselves in those ways already. But telling your young people, they might be like, no, I'm good. So I tend to be that one in the neighborhood where I'm like, you don't have a helmet on. You need to protect your head. It's important. Also checking your hearing, as I talked about earlier, checking your hearing keeps you more social. It keeps you absorbing information. It can be a big deal. Also your vision. If you're having trouble differentiating, colors or distances, contrasts, that can be a sign of early Alzheimer's. However, it could be a sign that it's just time to go get your prescription updated. So taking care of yourself and making sure that you're going through all the motions to eliminate all the other possible causes can help you lead a longer and healthier life. So you may be asking, what do you do when dementia is suspected? So the first thing is, again, talk to those that are close to you. Let them know that you have some concerns. People that you trust. Also going to your primary care physician and telling them that you have some concerns. They can help you distinguish whether or not that this is stress-related or you have another medical concern. Once those are ruled out, if dementia is still a concern, you can ask your primary care physician for a referral, either to a memory care assessment clinic or a cognitive neurologist. Sometimes a dementia diagnosis can be made by a primary care physician, but many times referring out to someone who specializes in that is a really good idea. We are lucky, and some of you may have been in the room when Georgia MemoryNet came and they talked about the memory assessment clinic. We are very lucky to be here in Hall County because just up the road in Gainesville is a memory assessment clinic. I've visited this location, great people, they're doing really wonderful things. And they typically go on a 2-visit model. They'll look at everything. They'll run all the tests. They will take your family history. They'll take the time to dive in and make sure that their diagnosis is going to be correct. And then when you go back on your second visit, they will let you know which direction that they think that you should go. On the right, I know that this is illegible. I lost my mic. Okay. Okay, so on the right, I know that this form is illegible. However, it is the form that you can go to the georgiamemorynet.org and download and take to your physician to ask for a referral to the MAC. Being that it's just up the road, we're really lucky. There's seven locations across the state. And then they are adding walk-in locations where they can do a telemed appointment with the memory assessment clinic. But like I said, for us, it's not that far a drive, so it's really good. And this form is available on their website, or you can have your physician's office download the form for you. So that brings me to the end. I feel